Why do Blackpool Pleasure Beach keep doing this? Hello, I'm Scott and you're watching Your Experience Guide, and in this video I am going to be talking about the big one retracking work that has been taking place over the last 5 years in every close season since 2019. I bet when you saw the title for this video you thought, oh no, Scott's going off on a negative video about Pleasure Beach again, but no, this is all going to be positivity because I really like what's been going on with the big one over the last couple of years and the retracking work to prolong the life of what is a very, very iconic roller coaster. So why have Blackpool Pleasure Beach been doing these retracks for the last 5 winters? Well, firstly, it's to prolong the lifespan of the big one. Of course, it is the most iconic roller coaster in the park. Not only does it draw people to Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but it draws people to Blackpool itself, which is very important for both Pleasure Beach as an amusement park and Blackpool as a resort. Without the big one, how would Blackpool do? Who knows? It's as iconic as Blackpool Tower and probably as important to Blackpool as the Blackpool Tower. Every time the big one does have retracking work done over the winter, there's of course a lot of talk about it online about they should retrack the first drop, they should retrack the turnaround, they should retrack the helix, they should do this bit, they should do that bit, they should buy new trains, this is what they need to do. But throughout the year, at various points, Blackpool Pleasure Beach will get together with an external inspection body, or maybe 2 or 3 different companies who have all got like expertise in steel and will literally inspect the big one piece to piece, track section to track section. They will go over the whole thing, looking at what needs doing, where needs retracking, what just needs a bit of patching up. These kind of inspections do take place, and that is how the Pleasure Beach is determining which bit of the big one is going to be retracked every winter. Of course, cost is a major factor in this as well, because you know, they could look at it and go, yeah, we do want to do the first drop, yeah, we do want to do the turnaround, yeah, we do want to do the helix, but you're probably talking like 4, 5, 6 million to do it in one go. And then you've got to factor in how long is the big one going to be closed, where are they going to put the steel whilst the work's going on, where are Tasika going to put the steel whilst they're making it, are Tasika, who are doing the retracks, going to have to postpone all their other work. There's so many elements to why Pleasure Beach can't just do what Alton Towers have done with Nemesis, where they've gone, we'll close it for a year, we'll completely retrack the bits that need doing, we'll change the supports, we'll give it a new theme, we'll create a marketing campaign out of it. It's very different for Blackpool Pleasure Beach for a number of reasons. Firstly, the closure of Nemesis at Alton Towers does not impact on the rest of the park in terms of, oh well, we'll have to close this ride, we'll have to close that ride, we'll have to, you know, Nemesis could stay closed for a whole season last year and it didn't disrupt any other ride in the park. Whereas if the big one was closed at Blackpool Pleasure Beach and they were working on it throughout the season, there's going to be days where Infusion has to close, Big Dipper has to close, Steeplechase has to close, maybe big walkway areas in the park have to close. The disruption of retracking the big one in one whole go over a season would cause absolute chaos, not only for the Pleasure Beach, but also for the people in Blackpool on the seafront. The amount of times I've watched these retracking projects going on where they've had to close lanes on the seafront or on the road behind the Pleasure Beach, I think it's Bond Street, because there's been a massive crane there lifting track off or putting track in. So the disruption to not only Pleasure Beach but also to Blackpool itself would be absolutely bonkers. So retracking the big one in one whole go is just, it would never be possible. As much as enthusiasts like myself look at it and go, would that have been the right thing to do? I just don't think it was ever a possibility that they could do that. Also, how would Blackpool Pleasure Beach fare for a whole season with the big one closed? It was bad enough when Valhalla was closed for a season. Everyone was asking when it'd be reopening, they wanted updates all the time. We were the same, we were tweeting Pleasure Beach all the time, any news on Valhalla, any updates, and it'd be the same with the big one. Now imagine they close the big one for a whole season for retracking, and there becomes a situation where the track gets delayed being delivered, or the track has to be remade, or something or the other happens, and then the big one ends up shut for 2 years. You can probably get away with something like Valhalla being closed for an extra year or two than expected. Closing the big one for 1 year alone would be a disaster for Pleasure Beach, but having to close it for longer, it doesn't even bear thinking about the impact it would have on the whole park. So I suppose I have to take it back to the point of, why are Blackpool Pleasure Beach doing this? Because it's not just for the riders' enjoyment that they're taking out bits of track here and there and replacing it with brand new track, and it's not because of that, it's not from a presentation point of view, it's purely because the track sections that are being taken out have reached a point where they are beyond repair and they need to be replaced. When I've seen some of the track sections being lifted out and then placed on the seafront ready to go on the back of a lorry or put on the Pleasure Beach car park or wherever, and when you see the state of the track that's come out, you go, yeah, I can see why they've replaced it. The corrosion is shocking. There's fractures in the track as well, and it's not because of bad maintenance, it's simply because of where Blackpool Pleasure Beach is located, next to the Irish Sea, battered by the elements. It's just an unforgiving climate for such a big steel structure to be just open to the elements 24/7. There's no getting away from the fact that the big one has been battered by the elements for the last 30 years, and it has had an impact. You only have to look at the supports when you walk on the seafront. They're covered in rust and corrosion. It's the same on the track, and this is going to be a project that we just see going on and on and on and on until it's completely finished. So when it comes to which bits of track are going to be replaced, I think there's several factors. I think firstly, the level of the wear and tear, which is determined obviously by Pleasure Beach's engineers, external bodies who've assessed it with the Pleasure Beach. They'll look at the areas which need doing more than others. For example, for years now, ever since they started the retrack, loads of us have been saying we'd love to see the turnaround done, we'd love to see the helix done. As much as they do need doing, the areas that have been done before it needed doing first because of the corrosion and because of many other reasons why those areas were determined as priorities over things like the turnaround, the helix, the first drop. All areas that will need doing and all areas that will be done, but Pleasure Beach have to prioritise safety over riders' enjoyment, which I know probably sounds unfortunate, but safety is always the thing that comes first in the attractions industry. Of course, cost is another factor. You could potentially look at it and say, well, when they did the tunnel section where it takes you on-ride photo, why didn't they do it all the way back to the mid-course brake run? Well, again, it comes down to cost. Also, there's been other bits where you look at it and go, well, you've got new track there, new track here, but old track there. Why didn't they do it all? But again, it comes down to cost and time and labour and all sorts of different bits and bobs. So it's a massive project, which obviously the level of wear and tear is the most important thing. But secondly, you have to factor in things like cost. And as far as I'm aware, riders' enjoyment and comfort does come into it, but obviously it is not a priority compared to something like safety and of course compared to the cost. And I do have to mention this as well. Blackpool Pleasure Beach are not replacing Big One track sections because the ride sometimes stops on the lift hill. I cannot believe how many times I have read that on the internet in the last 2 weeks. It's like, no, completely different situation. The ride stops on the lift hill because of sensor or computer issues, not because it needs a retrack. Honestly, the narrative created by Lancashire establishments who write these articles about the big one stopping on the lift hill, they've got a lot to answer for when it comes to people's perception on the big one now. They have created a narrative that is never going to go away, and it amazes me that Pleasure Beach never shut it down when it was happening. I don't think it was last year, I think it was the year before, when there was these constant articles about the big one stopping on the lift hill. It was literally daily at times, and it's like, I'm amazed Pleasure Beach didn't get somebody from director level or management level to stand in front of a camera, explain how the big one works, explain why the articles are nonsense, basically like Alton Towers were doing when the Smiler was having a couple of issues in, I think it was 2016, 17, 18 kind of time, where it kept having like stoppages. Well, I say it kept having them, it occasionally had them, but as soon as it happened, the news were all over it. But Alton Towers responded by getting Francis Jackson in front of the camera saying, no, this is why this has happened, it's perfectly normal, stop reporting about it. I think if that had happened, all these nonsense articles about the big one always breaks down, yeah, they won't be happening anymore, but they still do, and they'll probably happen again this year, but nonsense, nothing to do with big one retracts. Whenever we post about the big one retracts on our social media, I have honestly lost count of how many times I've read, well, why don't they just remove it? Why don't they RMC it? Why don't they get XYZ manufacturer to come and rebuild it? It's just not as easy as that. For reasons already explained, obviously the impact of having the big one closed for a long time will be significant, but also how long it would take to fully rebuild the big one from scratch, or basically taking all the track off and reusing the supports. It will be a massive project. You're talking maybe 2-3 years, talking 25, 30 million, possibly, maybe a little bit less. I don't know. I don't know the cost of steel these days, but the overall impact and cost of replacing the big one with something completely new or completely reusing the structure that it's got, the cost and the impact to Blackpool Pleasure Beach would be so significant that I think that they'd lose so much money by having the big one closed for such a long time. But the return on investment, would they get that money back in this day and age? I don't think they would. As much as we all get excited by new roller coaster projects in the UK, and especially at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, in my opinion, Blackpool Pleasure Beach are doing the right thing with the big one. They're taking old track sections out, putting new sections in that are almost the same or like for like. They are maintaining a roller coaster that is still extremely popular in Blackpool, extremely popular in the north of Britain. That includes Scotland. People come down to ride the big one every year from Scotland. People come from all over the north to enjoy the big one and everything else at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. But without the big one, with it closed for a couple of years for a refurb, a rebuild, whatever, it would be a disaster for the park. So I think they're doing the right thing, and they're not disrupting other things going on at the park whilst they're retracking the big one. They're not disrupting in-season operations of the big one. There's only one time in the last 5 years where it's opened late after retracking, and that was due to supply chain issues. That was not the fault of the Pleasure Beach or Tazica. It just happened. We were in the middle of COVID. It was always going to be a problem. So yeah, in the last 5 years, 4 times they've had it back open, or I say that, 3 times they've had it back open. 1 time they haven't, and fingers crossed that this year it opens on time as well. But I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. It's already been testing following the retrack, so why wouldn't it reopen unless it's windy? After the last 5 years of Pleasure Beach and Tazica working together to retrack the big one, I genuinely don't think that Pleasure Beach are now going to make the decision to RMC the big one or completely remove it and get another manufacturer into, whether it be Mack, Intamin, Vekoma, S&S, whoever, to come in and give it a completely new layout with completely new steelwork. I just don't see that being a possibility. I often see a lot of talk that the big one needs new trains. Again, the grass is always greener on the other side. It's easy to say that now with the current set of trains, but what happens if they replace the current set with some new trains and they're awful? Because you never know how they're going to be. It's ride tech from the 80s, from the 70s even. It's mine train technology that was being built in the 70s. That's where the Arrow Hypercoaster was born out of. It's got mine train trains on it. It's got mine train track. So to put a modern type of train on it, would it work? Who knows? But they could do that, and it could be worse. Look at the Grand National, for example. After the fire, Pleasure Beach ran it on 2 trains in 2005 with the trains that survived the fire. In 2006, they put 4 new trains on it. It made the capacity worse. It made the ride experience worse. and it's an overall worse experience than it was before the fire. So sometimes it's better to stick with what you've got than go changing for something modern that might not work. So in my opinion, where should they retract next on the big one? I've said it many a time, I've even mentioned it in this video. I'd really like to see the turnaround done. I'd really like to see the helix done, basically from block break all the way to where they did at the tunnel. But I believe that would be a 2-3 year project. It'd take a long time to do. The turnaround again would be a massive project for them to do. So I don't know. I think either of those areas would be perfect for the big one to be done next, and would significantly improve the overall experience. But I think if we're talking about sustaining its lifespan at Pleasure Beach, then they've got to do whatever it needs doing next, and that could be anywhere on the layout really, because especially the bits that are open to the elements. So it'll be interesting to see where they do next. Again, I'd love to see it be in the helix. I don't think that's going to happen until probably 2-3 years down the line though, so we'll just have to see where they go with it next. But I'm certain that we're going to see a lot more retracking on the big one over the next 5, 6, 7 years, so let's see how it goes. So we're coming to the end of this video now. Before I end it though, please hit the like button. It's a little thumbs up below. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Both of those things massively help us going forward. And please comment. Many thanks for watching. See you next time.